All right. Good evening, everybody. This is Nate G., Dr. Lisle. How are you doing today?
Good. How you doing?
I'm doing pretty good. So
all right.
The title of our podcast today is Why is Academia So Left-Wing? And in kind of researching this, I know, and in my experience, I had always experienced in college that the professors that I had were always very liberal, very left-wing, always trying to stuff in their opinion with regards to politics when the lesson came into play. And as far as, as early as January of last year, there was a paper out that actually explored the role of the professors and how left-wing they actually are. And I think it was, I forgot the name of the journal, the Behavioral Science Journal or something like that. And it's very, very interesting to read is the journal, the Behavioral and Brain Sciences, and the article is Political Diversity Will Improve Social Psychological Science. So it's a very interesting topic, and so I'd like to hear your thoughts, Dr. Lisle, on this conundrum.
Yeah, it's not something that I've studied much of. It's partly the subject it's a part of an extraordinary book written by Steven Pinker, who's one of our most brilliant human beings on Earth, and he in a book called The Blank Slate, and the subtitle is The Modern Denial of Human Nature. I don't recommend that you pick this up for light reading. This is heavy going, and it's a very long book. This is a tome, and this is an opus that Pinker wrote in the late 90s out of his frustration with essentially academia and some leading figures in academia like Stephen Jay Gould and some other individuals at Harvard who were absolutely determined to drown out evolutionary psychology. So he went to a lot of trouble to sort of analyze his way through this and to demonstrate the tremendous defense that these hot shots in academia and these very high positions were trying to stop the thinking of evolutionary psychology. But that he didn't really. So he had his own axe to grind there, and he made 50 brilliant points, as is consistent with what you would expect out of Steven Pinker. But I don't think he explained why the liberal bent in academia is widespread and pervasive, as opposed to the sort of top-down frustration that he had with these. With the quote leaders of academia at Harvard. I think I would begin my analysis. I mean, I've certainly thought about this off and on for many years. I was obviously I spent 4 years undergrad and 7 years of grad school. So I spent a decade in academia, actually more than I spent a couple of years teaching after that at the university level. So yeah, I spent essentially my entire 20s and part of my 30s in the academic world. And academia is without a doubt very liberal in its bent, and it's assumed that everybody in there is liberal, and so if a person is conservative, you would never know it because they're going to keep their mouth shut. I was just reading some statistics before we got on just to get a feel for it. Apparently, 4% of academia is what they would consider themselves to be conservative. There's going to be where I stand, so that people aren't guessing, and I'm not trying to signal it. From a very young age, the libertarians made a lot of sense to me. It doesn't mean that I agree with every policy or position of the Libertarian Party, but the general concept of libertarianism always made a lot of sense to me. And then later, when I learned about the evolution of politics, and I could then see, as I talked about on a previous podcast, that there wasn't an in principle perfect solution between the fundamental conflict of share not share, then my interest in defending or promoting either a more liberal or a more conservative view kind of went by the wayside. So I look at the issues of politics more dispassionately these days than I did when I was 22 years old. And however, it is an interesting curiosity to look at our most respected and most intellectually challenging places to go to school and to try to learn are uniformly, almost uniformly. There's a few exceptions, obviously, but essentially uniformly liberal. So this calls into question why this would be, when the obvious answer from their standpoint would be, well, we're more intelligent and we're right. And so therefore, of course, because that's true, that's why we all think the way we do. A more in-depth analysis, of course, will indicate that that is not true. So now we have to look at the situation and we have to say, well, now wait a second. If they're not right because they're just more intelligent, why does academia have a very strong left bias? Oh, why is this the case? And so I begin my investigation of this with obviously the concept that all behavior is being driven by cost-benefit analysis. So we start there by realizing that the behavior that organisms do is being directed by thinking or information processing or computations that are simply telling the organism that this is in their best interest. So this is a little eerie for people to think about, but the eerie thing is that your brain actually operates in a way that isn't necessarily consistent with, quotes, the truth. It's consistent with what's in your best interest. And so you will actually have thoughts and feelings that may not reflect objective features of reality, but they, in fact, reflect what is in your personal genetic best interest. Now, this will help explain, for example, the reason why a lot of people may believe in supernatural things, like a deity. And the reason why they might believe that isn't because the objective evidence is convincing to them, but in fact it is in their genetic best interest to believe in that. And so the system is sophisticated enough to realize that you do not want to get kicked out of your group and be some kind of a leper and lose a bunch of status. And so it is nimble enough to have a person still believe in something where other parts of the analytic engine may be grinding away at the problem and suspecting that it's not true. Okay? And so because the brain is not essentially totally integrated, that you have independent neural circuits working, a person can have different areas of the analytic engine coming up with somewhat and sometimes contradictory conclusions. And so that individual can be sitting on two different suspicions about what the truth is, but one of those may be dominant, and it may be one that is logically inconsistent with underlying logical analysis. But it is in the organism's best interest as it surveys its adaptive landscape and realizes it's not going to get laid unless it believes a certain thing. So this is an interesting and curious way of looking at human nature, yet it's not all that surprising. So, for example, in the same way, we visited this before in other areas around mating. For example, a man may feel like he believes and think and feel that he is in love with a girl that he just met, 4 or 5 weeks ago. And this, even though he's got other parts of his brain that are recognizing that she is not actually a pair bond quality, that she is 5 or 10% or 3% or 8% or 16% below paragon quality, and he is not going to be, quote, in love with her 3 months from now. But that feeling and the thinking and what comes out of his mouth and what emanates from a great deal of his behavior is that he's crazy about her and he loves her, and et cetera. And so he says these things, and that is a part of an evolutionary arms race that has evolved in response to females trying to not have this happen to them, and therefore look for men who appear to be relatively aloof and not that interested, and therefore not putting up that much energy in order to get into their pants, and thereby signaling to the female that they are only of casual mating strategy interest. So as females have evolved better and better detection mechanisms for finding men that are playing the casual mating strategy and trying to cloak it, the men have evolved greater and greater capacity to act their way around the female detection mechanisms. And in doing so, one of the most effective ways is self-deception. So it turns out that men can think and feel things that other parts of their brain know are not true. And in doing so, they can reproduce their genes more prolifically than men that can't do that. So we can see it is quite possible for people to believe in things that are not true in order to advance their genetic interests. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to so now I'm going to talk my way down through what makes sense to me as to why academia may be quite liberal. It's going to turn out that academia, by its very nature, is indicating a hierarchical achievement. In other words, we are smarter than you. We are the teachers, you are the learners, and here at the highest part of the teaching of a human, which is no longer kindergarten, grade school, junior high, or high school, and we're not even talking about the junior high now, or excuse me, the junior college. Now we're all the way to the big bad universities. And so at the big bad universities, what we're going to have is people that teach there got there because they outcompeted a bunch of people. So they have climbed a dominance hierarchy that is associated with significant achievement intellectually. So one of the issues here is that, of course, the reason that they're climbing these dominance hierarchies is for the same reason that people climb any dominance hierarchy, and that is that they're seeking status, and that status can be converted into various and sundry survival and reproductive chips. But let's, for the moment, we're going to ignore the females in academia. We can explain them just fine as well. But what we're going to do...
Let's ignore the females in academia. Typical man.
Well, I would just want to point out that when I was in academia, I ignored the males in academia, and I was exclusively focused on the females that were in academia. So
it all balances out.
So it balances out, indeed. Okay. So now, just from the standpoint for the simplicity of seeing how this logic would work, if we were to look at males in academia, we would say, well, why are they there and why are they doing what they're doing? And what they're trying to do is they're trying to do something that the village finds valuable, and they're trying to do it as well and as brilliantly as possible in order to ascend a hierarchy, in order to display that they have better genes than their competitors. So these are so academical credentials are akin to peacock's feathers. They are a method for displaying low mutation loads. So it isn't that academics generally have to do anything brilliant. What they have to be is they have to be smart and they have to be diligent as hell. You have to have some social skill, jump through hoops, not piss people off, not tell anybody you're conservative, not let anything slip. In other words, you have to jump and jump and jump through a bunch of hoops for years as you climb this hierarchy, et cetera, diligently turn in your little grant applications on time and have a nice, tidy little study that you're proposing that doesn't upset anybody. You got to be a pretty good clerk to be an academic. So, occasionally somebody's, there's brilliance in academia, of course, as you'd expect, but mostly there isn't. Mostly what there is a bunch of pedestrian, high IQ clerks that are making sure that they knock down their $100,000 a year. Now, this is where we get into the rub, that what they're attempting to do is they're attempting to display genetic superiority. However, it's going to turn out that in the Stone Age, that there are cues of genetic superiority which are obvious to people. And so it's going to be dominant in status, et cetera, in one way or the other. So it's going to be that, for example, with respect to males, it's going to be size, strength, intelligence, and particularly hunting ability. So there's going to be essentially income associated with this, along with sheer sexual attractiveness. So this is going to be a big deal. Now, it's going to turn out that as soon as we get to agriculture and we start to have private property, it's going to turn out that property is, whether it's land or whether it's other capital, is going to be valuable. And that the valuableness is going to be potentially passed on to your children and therefore give them advantages in competition in future generations. There's a reason why, it's, quote, valuable, is because it's valuable for it enhances the survival or reproductive potential of the individual that holds it. And so suddenly now we have a new way, not entirely new, but it's a new way of assessing the genetic value or the genetic ranking of an individual, and that is how much wealth are they producing and how much wealth do they hold. And so this now becomes an enormously important, what we're going to call, fitness indicator. So fitness indicators of an animal are attributes that you can see in their behavior or their physical presence that indicate the relative level of gene quality relative to their competitors. So in peacocks, it's how their peacock feathers, how shiny are they, and how extraordinary is the plumage. What's interesting about the plumage of a peacock is it is inherently expensive. So it makes it difficult for you to both be alive and have a tremendous amount of shiny peacock feathers. The reason for this is that you are a walking target for predators. So in order for you to both have phenomenal plumage and still be alive, you must have a lot of really good genes in there, good genes for your nervous system, eyesight, hearing, etc., muscles, reflexes. To have the coat shiny, you must have a lot of energy in order to do a lot of grooming. If you don't look sick, and the plumage is very shiny and vibrant, then you have a low parasite load. These are all, this is it's like owning a 17,000 square foot house. Boy, you got a lot of upkeep. You know what I mean? You got a big 5 acres, gardener, all kinds of marble floors. To make this thing, to have this thing continue to be kept up, this is indicating a tremendous amount of gene quality. This is actually what we're going to call the handicap principle. So this was all figured out by Amit Zahavi in the 1970s over in Israel. So the more sort of wealth a person has and that they're carrying around and that they're managing, et cetera, this is I think we can all agree that if I tell you I have a company with 3,000 employees in it and that I have, 186,000 square feet of office space for these employees, and they've all got, et cetera, and I'm the CEO and I started this thing, you are thinking, whoa, that guy accumulated a lot of resources. The world didn't just pony up that kind of resources. He must do something extremely well, and he must be an extraordinary organizer, and he must have great insights into the market, and he must work extremely hard. In other words, he's got to have a lot of brains and a lot of talent in order to be in that position. Now, if I tell you that what I do is I run a little stand at a farmer's market every weekend where I sell little buttons that people have, and I make about $150 a day. And I do that, 3-4 days a week, and that's what I do, and I live in a trailer at the back of my mom's house. Then you realize, well, wait a second. You may be a genius artist, and I want to take a look at what you painted, but I'm pretty sure that you're not as fit as the guy that has the big company. So these are what we're going to call fitness indicators. And it's going to be obvious to everybody, just in the same way that everybody likes to, well, not everybody, but many people that are threatened like to put their heads in the sand and deny that there's an objectivity of beauty. People, many people, many commentators, many social scientists, they have made a war on the concept of beauty, and it's the idea that everyone is inherently as beautiful as everybody else, and that standards of beauty are given to us by the media. That was the standard operating line, incidentally, in academia throughout the 1970s, 80s, and 90s. Now, that absolutely crashed on the rocks as the academics in evolutionary psychology tore that concept to pieces. And it is in tatters and in ruins, and nobody with a brain and any honesty believes it. We now know that beauty is extremely objective. We know that any two raters, male raters anywhere on the planet, rating females of any race, will rate them over 0.9 correlation coefficient, and they will rate them, two guys from Cameroon that have never seen an Asian woman, okay, will rate Asian women exactly in the same way that Asian men rate them, who will rate them exactly in the same way that Caucasian men will rate them. In other words, the standards of beauty are worldwide and objective, which is, interesting. Evolutionary psychologists would not be surprised at this. Now, so in the same way as people have tried to deny that there is objectivity in beauty, which there is tremendous objectivity in beauty, I'm not going to say it's 100% because obviously it's not 100%, but it is extraordinarily high. In the same way, it is also objective that people that amass more resources are objectively superior to those who amass less. Okay? They have better brains, better organization, they understand reality more accurately, and they are able to manage their movements and their time and energy and the resources in order to accumulate more resources. So anybody that's making $1 million a year, and I'm not saying anybody because it could be somebody that inherited some crooked operation from his uncle, okay? It doesn't take any brains at all. But the point is that in principle, if we were to take people that make $1 million a year in this country, those people are more competent on average than the people that make $100,000. And the people that make $100,000 are more competent on average than the people that make 50. And the people that make 50 are more competent on average than the people that make 20, et cetera, et cetera. Okay? So the correlation coefficient between competence and income average is obvious and it is robust. Okay? So that being the case, it's going to turn out that our friends in academia have a problem. And that is that they have actually instituted a hierarchy that is independent of the free market. So academics are paid on salary bases that are sort of organized and negotiated through union situations. This is not a free market. So if you are a superstar, social psychologist, God knows what that would be. But if you were, you're not going to get $500,000 a year to teach at the University of Tulsa because they just don't care. They need a social psychologist. If you want to go live and teach at Tulsa and you're a good social psychologist, you might just be able to get a job there, and they're going to pay you $118,000 a year. That's what it's going to be. So academics, essentially, as they are displaying their peacock feathers with respect to the most obvious and glaring and legitimate indicator of genetic fitness, are faring okay, pretty good. Okay, nobody would argue that making $120,000 a year as a Berkeley professor is bad. You know what I mean? It's like, hey, you did pretty well. But did you do as well as the guy that's making $25 million a year across the Bay in Silicon Valley? No, you didn't. Okay, and so as a result, and guess who does not think that your achievement of becoming a full professor at Berkeley in sociology is as fancy as making $25 million a year at your company in Silicon Valley? Nate, I want to give you one guess who isn't going to buy that those are equal. How about the 30-year-old 10? Okay? The extremely hot female is not going to buy the fact that I am supposed to consider those two things to be equivalent. Right?
It's her biology. She can't help it.
Her biology can't help it. Her biology can sniff out that you, the academic, have placed yourself in an essentially uncompetitive environment that is an artificial environment that is not particularly competitive, that you don't have to be so great, that what you have to be is sort of an ass-kissing clerk. Okay, you don't have to do anything that brilliant or great, and most of them don't. And yet they have a hierarchy that says, oh, well, I got to full professor. Well, so you did. Where's your great achievement? Like, does the world really care? And they become obsessed with how many citations they have and how many publications they have. Really? Who cares? The free market doesn't.
In fact, there's even a congressman that gives out the Fleece Award for some of the papers he finds completely ridiculous. What was the one you were saying about dung beetles?
But I can't believe you're old enough to remember that. That was Senator William Proxmire, and that was famous. He gave up the Golden Fleece Awards to academics who wasted the most public money. It was beautiful. Now we see the issue. So we go back to the cost-benefit analysis of all behavior, which is going to include the thinking and computations that are underneath it. And a corollary is, for me, in looking at human nature, is when you don't understand something, about people or why it is that they do what they do, always look for status. Always look for status as the reason why they're doing it. Because other motivations are going to be obvious, like why is everybody standing under the tree? Answer, it's hot outside. Okay? We can quickly infer why it is that they're doing what they're doing. But when we can't, when we are puzzled about something, the place to look is status, because there's going to be some quirk in the social landscape about why it is that they are doing what they're doing, because they think that it's going to optimize their status. So why does a scientist who has a PhD in biology and is actually not a flunky PhD, but he's really smart, why does he, try to get the Templeton Prize? Because he's going to believe in, say that he believes in intelligent design rather than natural selection. Answer, he's looking for status. Okay, he cannot impress the girls or whoever he wants to impress in another coalition. So he goes to a less competitive coalition and will seek out the genes there, and that's why they'll do what they'll do. Okay, now. So with respect to academics and being liberal, what they must do is they must have an argument that rejects the underlying legitimacy of the fitness indicator dominance hierarchy that exists in a free market. The fitness indicator dominance hierarchy that exists in a free market is how much money do you make? Okay? Now, is it a perfect indicator? No, but we've already been through this. It is a definitely legitimate indicator. There is no question that the correlation coefficient is strongly positive with respect to income and genetic fitness. And so as a result, the world believes in it. And you're not going to talk the world out of it. And you will not talk the hot chicks out of it. There is no way. And so what do you do if you're an academic? What you're going to do is you are going to try to undermine the legitimacy of that dominance hierarchy. And so what you're going to say is, oh, capitalism, the capitalists cheat and they lie and they fleece the people and they're exploiters, et cetera, et cetera. That's what you're going to get. And it's going to be a never-ending stream of this kind of drivel as they seek to undermine the sexual legitimacy of fitness indicators in the free market being wealth. They don't want any part of it, okay? And I believe that is an undiscussed, typically undiscussed, but absolutely core motivational principle for why the typical academic is a liberal.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I don't think that they have a choice as to how they think, basically. That their minds are shaped to try to figure out what's in their best interest, and what they figure out is, hey, we have to undermine the legitimacy of this other hierarchy that exists in the culture, and the way we're going to do it is we're going to say that they lie and they cheat, and that the fitness indicators that appear to be being demonstrated are not legitimate, and that is why. And ironically, their hierarchy that is not legitimate.
Mm-hmm.
So I would argue there's a lower correlation in the fitness of the genetic fitness of the success in academia than there is in the success in commerce.
So there's so meaning that if you've succeeded in academia, meaning you've published 1,800 papers or whatever the number is, and you've gotten fellowship after fellowship, it doesn't translate as you being more competent than the brand new professor. Whereas in the real world, if you built five Fortune 500 companies, you definitely are more competent than the small business owner who just started a business. Yeah,
no question. Yeah, so academia is a sloppy and not a very good fitness indicator. It's a fitness indicator. Certainly, people that rise to the top of academia tend to be more competent than the people that do not succeed in academia. I don't doubt that that's true, but it's a real sloppy correlation. It's not as good a correlation. Wealth is not a perfect correlation either. Obviously, there's a lot of luck involved. There's a lot of issues that are involved in success in the business arena, but it is absolutely a legitimate fitness indicator, and that fact is that when someone has been very successful in business, it shines so much louder than the success in academia. The girls cannot help but see this. Who would we rather be with? Okay, the 38-year-old, associate professor who's up for tenure and might get his salary bumped up to $103,000. Okay, or the guy who has his own jet. Like, there's no comparison. And of course, we're going to find some girls that are going to go for the professor, all things being equal, but we won't find very many of them, and everybody knows it. And so I believe that deep down in the academic's brain, they understand that they are competing in the culture. Their hierarchy is a competitive hierarchy with the broader hierarchy of the marketplace, and they are determined to undermine the legitimacy of that, and through that, they have a very strong lean towards statism.
Now, in terms of the politics, the genetics of politics, the share not share that we had talked about a couple episodes, and again, near the beginning of our show, to some extent, it seems like you got some professors there that are working their asses off, and some of them become like Malcolm Gladwell, where they write a bunch of books, get a lot of fame, and some of them work their asses off, and they don't get that far. So it can seem like it's just kind of hit or miss.
Yeah, actually, almost no academics are ever successful outside of academia in any meaningful way. Was Gladwell an academic? I don't believe he was. No, he wasn't. Gladwell was just a journalist. And
he might just look like one.
No, he wants to be one. Gladwell would go around and interview academics, and through interviewing academics, he got a hold of a lot of really old ideas out of social psychology from the 1970s and 80s. And then when he wrote those up, he's a good writer, and they were interesting, and they made Malcolm Gladwell famous and make him look like a genius, when really what he was a journalist that went and interviewed some academics. And a lot of those ideas are real mediocre. Malcolm Gladwell,
we'll save that to
carefully. What's that? Yeah.
We'll save that whole.
Save that for another day. Sure.
Yeah. And now with the emergence of TED Talks, it's a possibility for a lot of the academics to get a lot of status, especially in the social media world. Right.
Yeah. So, and you know what? I'm not in any way. Well, I'm kind of down on academia just because I feel like the whole thing is it all winds up being heavily funded and is sort of its own enclave, living off government money, and so it winds up having certain ideas. This is not sort of the freedom of inquiry and open ideas that was envisioned by Thomas Jefferson. That is not what American academia is. American academia has a very definite pall that is cast over academia. There are ideas that are acceptable to think, and there are ideas that are not acceptable to think. And there's a great deal of conscious, deliberate denial about what the truth is, truths that are uncomfortable for the left wing, and that is where academia lives. And so it is not particularly admirable in that way. That doesn't mean that there aren't all enclaves in academia where brilliant work isn't being done. There is. And I would say, I don't know if this is true, but I believe that I probably have a particularly negative take on this being a psychologist, because psychology is right in the heart of human values and also in line of information which is subject to debate and actually causes a great deal of stress about those debates. Whereas if you are in particle physics, you would not be, or if you're in chemistry or you are in microbiology, you would not be discussing and be spokespersons for issues that were controversial in human life and in human affairs. So nobody ever asked the opinion of a physicist what they thought about beauty, okay? And then that the party line has to be that it's all subjective. No, but they would ask a psychologist because aesthetics would be an important part in emotional reactions and mating behavior and romance and love. Hell, these things should be downright in the heart of psychology. So psychology is sitting inside a place where there would be a tremendous amount of motivation to essentially hide the truth and to be intellectually dishonest. And I believe that the intellectual dishonesty in the social sciences is probably much greater than in the hard sciences.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've often talked with my dad about kind of a similar topic in the health industry. My dad's a structural engineer. And so, we've talked, and he said, well, can't you just read the conclusions of a study and just like make decisions from that? I remember a long time we were talking. I said, well, you could if it was as known as it was with structures. You don't have somebody coming out there saying, well, you can build a house in a pentagon and hope that it's not going to fall down. And then people say, oh, well, let's give that a little legitimacy. Let's see, maybe it might work. You never know. If the people living in the house believe it's going to work, it might work. Whereas in the health industry, that's not often the case. There's a lot of nonsense out there.
Yes, the health industry, health and medicine, has a different set of problems, and it's not the problems of the social sciences and the humanities and academia. And the problem they have is that they're crooked, and that there's a tremendous amount of money from that is pouring into the science in order to shape the outcomes of the science favorable for specific, industrial applications. So that's why you can't trust the science in medicine, and it's so bad that is partially what gave rise to the Cochrane Collaboration, 25 years ago, as legitimate scientists were incredibly frustrated by their own literature, knowing that they couldn't trust it, and that industry had infiltrated that industry, had infiltrated science to a degree that it was corrupted. That's still true now. And the Cochrane Collaboration itself is likely to be significantly corrupted, according to at least sources that I've talked to. But at least it was a bold attempt to at least try to get a clean snapshot. And I believe a great many of the people that volunteer their time for the Cochrane Collaboration are absolutely upstanding as hell. But as it becomes more influential, it's more likely to be corrupted. This is exactly the history of academia, of the sciences in the United States. So that we start out with land-grant universities working with farmers, et cetera, trying to help innovation for the good of all. But as soon as we wind up with a highly respected process called science, and with academia at the top of that, now it becomes worth buying, okay? And so now industry groups will infiltrate, and they will then have, quote, scientists at fancy universities come up with conclusions that are favorable to their product. And now we get a dirty system. So, that's another problem with academia that doesn't have anything to do with our present discussion.
Oh, okay. Yeah,
it's an interesting problem.
Yeah, whereas in social
psychology you don't have anything to sell.
Yeah. Whereas in psychiatry, I guess you do. It's kind of the same problem where
psychiatry.
And that's going to open up a whole can of worms.
Sure. Psychiatry is the whole conclusions from psychiatry have been totally up for sale, and they've been bought by industry, in my opinion. I better be sticking that in there from time to time, and so as a result, they're not legitimate, in my opinion. I could just see my license under challenge right now at the Board of Psychology. So this is a sort of a systemic problem when a sector of society gets a great deal of status and therefore potential influence over consumers. You can better believe that it's going to get bought, and so that has certainly happened in the sort of medical arena of academia. And they're not going to suffer the kind of social myopia that we see in the social sciences. They're not. Yeah, I don't think anybody doing research in medical schools on Prozac, could care less about thinking about Republican or Democrat or conservative or liberal. I don't think it really hardly enters their mind. They're off looking for patents and to get fees from industry groups for what it is that they do, and to add to their already exceptionally good salaries some consulting fees. You know what I'm saying? So that's a whole different thing.
So it seems like there's a lot more opportunity for status, and so they don't fall into the ceiling that they establish for themselves in academia.
Yes.
So it seems like the logical response to that scene. Yeah.
Absolutely. Humanities and social sciences and academia have nowhere else to go, so they have to try to impress everybody that their hierarchy is the legitimate hierarchy of fitness indicators, and that everybody else is just profit-seeking crooks, and therefore that any success in commerce should be heavily discounted by the hot man or woman that person's competing for.
Mm-hmm. And just like the CEO versus the guy who sells buttons at the farmer's market, there's a big difference. So speaking of which, I was going to get you a button for your birthday, Dr. Lisle, but you know what? I don't think I'm going to do that anymore. I know you're a Virgo, so you probably wouldn't be as.
Oh my God! I can't believe you said that. Oh well. Oh my. All right.
Well,
anything else cooking, or this? What's that?
No, this is good right now. Let's. We're going to take some listener comments and questions next week. And we're going to have some questions that we have left over from a few episodes back. And we've got a full lot of them. So I'll get to that. We'll get to as many as we can. If anybody's listening right now and you have any questions, comments, concerns, if you'd like to opine, just shoot me an email and we'll try to get it on the air. So Dr. Lisle, thank you very much again. We really appreciate it.
Pleasure, and I'll talk to you next week, Nate.